The scorching desert sun beat down mercilessly as Arthur Campbell pushed through his 5th mile. The unconscious woman draped across his shoulders, growing heavier with each step. His military training kicked in, never leave anyone behind. As he finally reached the evacuation point and gently laid her down, her shirt shifted, revealing a distinctive silver necklace with an eagle pendant. Arthur's blood ran cold. He'd seen that exact necklace before, worn by the commanding officer who had changed his life forever 3 years ago. The same officer who had mysteriously vanished after a classified mission went wrong, leaving behind only questions and a heartbroken soldier struggling to raise his young son alone. Now here she was, unconscious in his arms, with no memory of who she was or the life they'd once shared. What would you do if the person you risked everything to save was the one who had disappeared from your life without a trace, holding the key to answers you'd been desperately seeking? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you: the emergency. Radio crackled to life in Arthur Campbell's weathered pickup truck as he guided a hiking group back from Red Canyon Trail. Search and rescue needed immediately. Tourist vehicle found abandoned near Skull Rock. Female victim missing for 12 hours in extreme heat conditions. Arthur didn't hesitate. At 34, the former Army sergeant had seen enough desert emergencies to know that 12 hours in the Sonoran wilderness could mean the difference between life and death. He quickly arranged for his assistant guide to escort the hikers back to town, then radioed his location to the search coordinator. "This is Campbell. I'm 3 miles southeast of Skull Rock. Beginning search pattern now." The sun was already climbing toward its merciless midday peak as Arthur grabbed his emergency pack and water supplies. His military training had taught him to read the desert like a map. Every rock formation, every shadow, every subtle change in the landscape told a story. Today, that story was one of survival against impossible odds. Following the scattered footprints and disturbed sand, Arthur tracked the missing woman's desperate journey deeper into the unforgiving terrain. The tracks showed she'd been disoriented, doubling back several times, her steps becoming increasingly erratic as dehydration set in. After 2 hours of methodical searching, he found her collapsed beneath a small overhang of rock, her lips cracked, skin flushed with dangerous heat exhaustion. She was unconscious but breathing. Arthur quickly assessed her condition: severe dehydration, likely heat stroke, but alive. Without hesitation, he lifted her onto his shoulders in a fireman's carry, the same technique that had saved countless lives during his military service. The nearest road was 5 miles away through brutal desert terrain, but Arthur had carried wounded soldiers farther than that in Afghanistan. This woman wouldn't die on his watch. The journey became a test of endurance that pushed even Arthur's limits. Each step sent waves of pain through his legs, his own water supply dwindling as he prioritized keeping the woman hydrated with small sips whenever she stirred. The desert seemed to stretch endlessly, heat mirages dancing on the horizon like cruel illusions of salvation. By the 4th mile, Arthur's vision began to blur from exhaustion and dehydration. But he pressed on, driven by the soldier's code he'd lived by for 8 years: leave no one behind. The woman stirred occasionally, mumbling incoherently, her weight seeming to increase with every step as Arthur's strength waned. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Arthur spotted the glint of metal in the distance: the search and rescue vehicles waiting at the designated pickup point. With his last reserves of strength, he stumbled the final 100 yards and gently lowered the woman to the ground as paramedics rushed forward. "Good work, Campbell," the lead paramedic said immediately, beginning 4 fluids. "You saved her life." Few more hours out there, and the medic's words faded as Arthur knelt beside the woman, ensuring she was properly positioned for treatment. As they shifted her clothing to attach monitoring equipment, her shirt collar moved aside, revealing A distinctive silver necklace with an intricately carved eagle pendant. Its wings spread wide, eyes fierce and proud. Arthur's heart stopped. His hands trembled as recognition flooded through him like ice water. That necklace, he'd seen it every day for 6 months during his deployment in Afghanistan. It had belonged to Captain Alara Finch, his commanding officer, the woman who had saved his unit during the ambush at Forward Operating Base Phoenix. The same woman who had recommended him for promotion, who had written letters to his ex-wife asking her to reconsider their divorce, who had promised to help him build a better life for his son when they returned stateside. The same woman who had vanished without a trace 3 years ago after a classified operation went catastrophically wrong, leaving behind only questions, grief, and a devastated soldier who blamed himself for not being there when she needed him most. Now she lay unconscious before him, her face peaceful but unfamiliar in its vulnerability, wearing the necklace that had become his symbol of lost honor and unfinished duty. The desert rescue that had started as a routine emergency had just become something far more complex and emotionally devastating. As the paramedics loaded her into the ambulance, Arthur stood frozen in the desert heat, his mind reeling with questions that had haunted him for 3 years. How was she here? Why had she disappeared? And most importantly, did she remember anything about the life they'd shared, the promises made, and the mission that had torn everything apart? The ambulance disappeared into the distance, leaving Arthur alone with the vastness of the desert and the crushing weight of a reunion he had never dared hope for but had never stopped dreaming about. 3 hours later, Arthur Campbell sat in the emergency room waiting area of Desert Valley Medical Center, his dusty boots propped up as nurses insisted he receive treatment for his own heat exhaustion. The 4 drip in his arm felt cold against his sun-baked skin, but his mind was nowhere near the sterile hospital corridor. It was trapped 3 years in the past, in the mountains of Afghanistan, where everything had gone wrong. Arthur's phone buzzed with a text from his babysitter. Tommy asking when you'll be home. Should I give him dinner? Tommy, his 8-year-old son, was the center of Arthur's universe, the reason he'd left the military and the reason he got up every morning. Arthur quickly typed back, "Emergency rescue. Home by 8. Order pizza, his favorite. Thanks, Maria." Arthur's life had become a carefully constructed routine built around his son's needs. After his discharge from the Army following the failed mission in Afghanistan, he'd moved to Copper Springs, Arizona, a small desert town where nobody asked too many questions about his past. He'd started Campbell Desert Tours, leading hiking groups and providing wilderness survival training, work that kept him outdoors and away from the suffocating memories of military life. Every morning at 5 a.m., Arthur would prepare breakfast while Tommy got ready for school, their conversation flowing easily as they planned their evening activities. Tommy was a resilient kid who'd adapted well to their new life, though Arthur knew the boy missed having a mother figure. Arthur's ex-wife, Rebecca, had left them both when Tommy was 4. Unable to handle the emotional distance Arthur had developed after his military service. The divorce papers had arrived the same week Arthur learned about Captain Finch's disappearance, making that period the darkest of his life. The desert tours business barely covered their expenses, but it provided something more valuable than money: purpose. Arthur found healing in helping others navigate the wilderness safely, in teaching survival skills that could save lives. Each successful rescue, each group safely guided through dangerous terrain, felt like a small redemption for the mission he'd failed to complete in Afghanistan. Tommy had his own challenges. Born with mild autism, he was brilliant but struggled with social situations and changes in routine. Arthur had become expert at reading his son's needs, creating structured environments where Tommy could thrive. Their evenings were spent on homework, then Tommy's special interest: military history and geography. The boy could name every major battle of World War II and draw detailed maps of countries he'd never visited, finding comfort in the precision and logic of historical facts. "Daddy, did you save someone today?" was always Tommy's first question when Arthur returned from work. Arthur never lied to his son, but he filtered the details, focusing on the positive outcomes rather than the dangerous realities of desert rescues. Today's answer would be more complicated than usual. Arthur's small house on the outskirts of Copper Springs reflected their practical lifestyle. The living room served as both homework space and living area, with Tommy's carefully organized collection of maps and history books sharing space with Arthur's outdoor equipment. Family photos from their pre-military life sat alongside certificates from Arthur's search and rescue training, creating a visual timeline of their journey from broken family to resilient team. Financially, Arthur lived paycheck to paycheck. Tommy's specialized educational needs, including speech therapy and social skills training, consumed most of Arthur's earnings from the tour business. He supplemented their income with part-time work at Peterson's hardware store and occasional contract security jobs, but there was never enough left over for luxuries. Arthur had long ago sold his motorcycle and most of his military memorabilia to cover Tommy's medical expenses, keeping only his service medals and the letter of commendation that Captain Finch had written for him. The guilt Arthur carried was multifaceted. He blamed himself for not being present during the mission where Captain Finch had disappeared, having been reassigned to base duty just weeks before the operation. He'd requested to remain with his unit, but Finch herself had ordered him to stay behind, saying he was needed for training new recruits. That decision had probably saved Arthur's life, but had left him with survivor's guilt that therapy had only partially addressed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Arthur's relationship with his son was the one pure thing in his complicated life. Tommy's direct way of seeing the world, unfiltered by adult cynicism, often provided Arthur with perspective he couldn't find elsewhere. When Arthur struggled with nightmares or anxiety attacks, Tommy would quietly bring him a glass of water and sit nearby, not speaking, but providing silent companionship that was more healing than any medication. The desert had become Arthur's therapy. Its vastness and harsh beauty reminded him that survival was possible even in impossible conditions. Every sunrise over the red rocks, every successful navigation through treacherous terrain, every life saved reinforced his belief that redemption was possible, even for soldiers who'd lost their way. As Arthur sat in the hospital waiting room, 4 drips slowly rehydrating his exhausted body, he couldn't shake the image of that eagle pendant necklace. For 3 years he'd convinced himself that Captain Finch was dead, that the classified mission had gone wrong and she'd paid the ultimate price. He'd built his new life on that assumption, focusing on being the best father possible to Tommy, while quietly grieving for the commanding officer who'd believed in him when no one else had. Now, everything was uncertain again. The woman he'd carried 5 miles through the desert was alive, but was she still Captain Alara Finch? Did she remember him, remember their unit, remember the promises made during those long nights in the Afghan mountains, when they'd planned better futures for all their soldiers? Arthur's phone buzzed again. "Tommy, Dad, are you okay? Maria says you're at the hospital." Arthur smiled despite his confusion. His son always knew when something was different. "Just getting checked out after a rescue. Home soon. Love you, buddy." "Love. You too. Did the person you saved thank you?" Arthur stared at the phone, unsure how to answer. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that sometimes the people you save don't remember they ever needed saving at all? 50 miles away in Phoenix, Dr. Ilara Finch, though she now went by Dr. Sarah Chun, was reviewing patient files in her office at the Sunrise Rehabilitation Center. At 32, she had built a successful career as a trauma therapist specializing in memory disorders and PTSD. Ironic given that she couldn't remember the first 28 years of her own life. The elegant office reflected her professional success, psychology degrees from prestigious universities, awards for her research in trauma recovery, and shelves lined with journals documenting her innovative treatment methods. Yet beneath the polished exterior lay questions that no amount of professional accomplishment could answer. Sarah's fingers unconsciously traced the silver eagle pendant that hung around her neck, the only tangible connection to a past that remained frustratingly blank. She'd been found 3 years ago in a Phoenix hospital with severe head trauma and no identification, clutching the necklace so tightly that doctors had difficulty removing it for treatment. The injury had caused selective retrograde amnesia, leaving her with intact language skills and professional knowledge, but completely erasing her personal history. The social worker assigned to her case, Mrs. Rodriguez, had helped construct a new identity when no one came forward to claim her. They'd chosen the name Sarah Chun, partly based on a hospital bracelet that was too damaged to read clearly, and partly because it felt right to her somehow. Sarah had no way of knowing that the damaged bracelet had actually read E. Finch, and that her new surname was a coincidence that would later seem like fate. Sarah's apartment in Phoenix's historic district was a study in careful curation. Unable to rely on memories to guide her decorating choices, she'd chosen pieces that sparked some indefinable recognition: military history books, landscape photography of desert scenes, and furniture with clean, functional lines that suggested discipline and order. She didn't understand why these choices felt right, but her therapist had encouraged her to trust her instincts as they might represent buried memories trying to surface. Her work at the rehabilitation center brought deep satisfaction, though. Sarah couldn't explain why she was naturally gifted at helping trauma victims recover their sense of self. Her patients often commented that she seemed to understand their struggles in a way that went beyond textbook knowledge, as if she'd experienced similar losses herself. Sarah's specialty was treating veterans with PTSD, and she'd developed innovative techniques that combined traditional therapy with outdoor adventure programs. Believing instinctively that nature had healing powers, the Phoenix facility where Sarah worked was cutting edge, funded by a combination of government grants and private donations. Her research focused on how traumatic amnesia affected not just memory but identity formation, and her published papers had gained national attention. She was particularly interested in cases where patients retained professional skills but lost personal history, a phenomenon she understood intimately but could only study objectively in others. Sarah's personal relationships were cautiously maintained. She'd learned to navigate social situations by asking careful questions and listening more than she spoke, strategies that made her an excellent therapist but left her feeling isolated. She'd tried dating but found it difficult to build intimate connections when she couldn't share any childhood memories, family stories, or personal history. Most relationships ended amicably but superficially, leaving Sarah to wonder if she'd ever find someone who could accept her incomplete past. Her closest relationship was with Dr. Michael Torres, the center's director and her mentor. Michael had hired Sarah based on her intuitive understanding of trauma rather than her lack of traditional credentials, recognizing that her personal experience with memory loss made her uniquely qualified to help others. He'd become a surrogate family member, someone who accepted her exactly as she was without needing explanations for her mysterious past. Sarah's daily routine was precisely structured, perhaps reflecting training she couldn't consciously remember. She woke at 0530 hours. She never understood why she thought in military time. Completed a rigorous exercise routine that included push-ups and running, and arrived at work exactly 15 minutes early every day. Her colleagues had learned to rely on her punctuality and preparedness, though they often joked about her military precision. The dreams had started 6 months ago. Vivid nightmares filled with desert landscapes, helicopter sounds, and faces she couldn't quite see clearly. In these dreams, she wore a different uniform and carried herself with authority, giving orders to soldiers who respected and followed her. She always woke with the sound of her own voice shouting, move, move. And the phantom sensation of sand in her mouth. Sarah had begun keeping a dream journal, hoping to identify patterns that might unlock her memories. The dreams always featured the same elements: desert terrain that looked remarkably like the Arizona landscape outside Phoenix, the sensation of responsibility for others' safety, and an overwhelming sense of unfinished business. Sometimes she dreamed of a specific soldier, tall, dark-haired, with intense eyes and gentle hands, but his face always remained frustratingly unclear. Her apartment contained several items that predated her memory loss, things the hospital had returned to her, along with the necklace, a well-worn copy of The Art of War with extensive marginalia in her handwriting, a compass with military markings, and a photograph too, water damaged to make out faces but showing figures in what appeared to be military fatigues. These objects felt important, but their significance remained locked away with the rest of her past. Sarah's approach to therapy emphasized that identity wasn't solely dependent on memory, that people could rebuild meaningful lives even after devastating losses. She helped her patients understand that while their past experiences had shaped them, their future choices would define them. It was advice she tried to live by herself, though she couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in her forgotten past lay answers to questions she didn't even know she was asking. The necklace remained her most treasured possession. She'd researched its design extensively, learning that the eagle was a common military symbol representing strength, courage, and leadership. The craftsmanship was exceptional, suggesting it had been custom-made or held special significance. Sometimes she caught herself holding it during stressful moments, as if it provided comfort through some connection she couldn't consciously access. Her work with veteran patients had given Sarah extensive knowledge of military culture and terminology, information that seemed to come naturally to her rather than through study. She could identify different branch insignia, understood military rank structures, and knew protocols that weren't covered in her civilian psychology training. Colleagues assumed she'd done specialized research, but Sarah suspected the knowledge came from somewhere deeper. As Sarah prepared to leave her office that evening, she felt the familiar restlessness that had been growing stronger recently. The dreams were becoming more frequent and vivid, and she'd started experiencing moments of déjà vu during her daily routine. Something was stirring in her subconscious, as if her forgotten past was fighting to resurface. She had no way of knowing that 60 miles away, a former soldier was sitting in a hospital waiting room, staring at her photo on a medical intake form and trying to process the impossible reality that his lost commanding officer was alive and within reach. The call came at 6:47 p.m. as Arthur was driving home from the hospital, his own heat exhaustion treated and his mind still reeling from the day's events. Dr. Patricia Winters, the attending physician at Desert Valley Medical Center, had news about the woman he'd rescued. "Mr. Campbell, I wanted to update you on the patient you brought in today," Dr. Winters said. "She's stable and responding well to treatment. However, she's experiencing some confusion and memory gaps, which isn't uncommon with severe heat exhaustion. She's asking to speak with you. Apparently, you're the only person she remembers from the rescue." Arthur pulled over to the side of the desert highway, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "Doctor, I need to ask you something. The patient, does she go by the name Alara Finch?" There was a pause. "No, according to her ID, she's Dr. Sarah Chun from Phoenix. She works at a rehabilitation center there. Why do you ask?" Arthur's mind raced. Sarah Chun, not Alara Finch. But that necklace. "It's probably nothing. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The drive back to the hospital gave Arthur time to consider the possibilities. Maybe he was wrong about the necklace. Maybe the heat and exhaustion had made him see things that weren't there. But military training had taught him to trust his observations, and he was certain about what he'd seen. Arthur found Dr. Sarah Chun awake in her hospital bed, looking remarkably composed for someone who'd nearly died of heat exhaustion hours earlier. She was sitting up, sipping water, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. But it was her eyes that stopped Arthur cold, the same intelligent, assessing gaze he remembered from Captain Finch, though now it held uncertainty rather than commanding confidence. "You must be Arthur," she said, extending her hand with a firm grip that felt familiar. "Dr. Chun, I wanted to thank you for saving my life out there. The doctors say I wouldn't have survived another hour in the heat." Arthur shook her hand, studying her face carefully. The bone structure was the same, the way she tilted her head when thinking, even her posture despite being in a hospital bed. But she showed no recognition, no flicker of memory. "Just doing what anyone would do," Arthur replied. "Can I ask what were you doing out there alone? That's pretty dangerous country for hiking solo." Sarah's expression grew puzzled. "That's the strange thing. I remember leaving Phoenix this morning for a drive, but I can't recall why I went to that particular area or how I ended up so far from my car. The doctors think the heat exhaustion might have affected my short-term memory." Arthur sat down in the visitor's chair, his pulse quickening. Memory issues. That could explain everything or nothing. "Do you remember anything else about today? Anything before you got lost?" Sarah closed her eyes, concentrating. "Fragments. I remember feeling like I needed to go somewhere important, but I can't remember what or why. And there was something about ... She opened her eyes, looking directly at Arthur. "This might sound strange, but when I first saw you in the desert, right before I lost consciousness, I felt like I knew you, like I should recognize you." The admission sent a chill down Arthur's spine. He leaned forward slightly. "Dr. Chun, can I ask about your necklace, the eagle pendant?" Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her throat, fingers finding the silver chain. "This? I've had it for years. It single quotes S. Well, it's complicated. I actually have some memory issues from a head injury a few years ago. This necklace is one of the few things I have from before the accident." Arthur's heart pounded. This was it, the confirmation he'd been hoping for and dreading simultaneously. "Dr. Chun, Sarah, I think we need to have a longer conversation. What I'm about to tell you might sound impossible, but I believe we knew each other before your accident." Sarah's medical training kicked in, her expression becoming professionally cautious. "Mr. Campbell, head trauma can sometimes cause people to believe they recognize strangers. It's not uncommon for..." "You served in Afghanistan," Arthur interrupted gently. "Forward Operating Base Phoenix. You were a captain in the Army, commanding officer of a unit that included Staff Sergeant Arthur Campbell. That's me." The room fell silent except for the steady beep of medical monitors. Sarah stared at Arthur, her face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been recognition. "That's not... I'm a therapist. I work with trauma patients. I've never been in the military." But even as she spoke, Sarah's voice carried uncertainty. Her hand remained on the necklace, and Arthur could see her mind working, trying to process what he'd said. Arthur reached into his wallet and pulled out a worn photograph his unit in Afghanistan, taken 2 weeks before the mission that had changed everything. He handed it to Sarah, pointing to a figure in the center. "That's you. Captain Elara Finch. You saved my life more than once, and when I couldn't save yours during that last mission, it nearly destroyed me." Sarah took the photograph with trembling hands, studying the faces. The woman Arthur pointed to wore the same eagle necklace, had the same bone structure, the same eyes. But she was in military fatigues, carrying herself with unmistakable authority. "I don't remember this," Sarah whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "I can't remember this." Arthur moved his chair closer. "The injury that caused your amnesia, it happened 3 years ago, didn't it? After a classified mission that went wrong?" Sarah nodded slowly, still staring at the photograph. "The doctors said I was found after some kind of accident. No identification, no family came forward. They said I might have been in a car crash, but ... She looked up at Arthur. "How do you know about classified missions?" "Because I was supposed to be there. With you. You ordered me to stay behind for training duty," said the unit needed me at base. 3 days later, word came back that the mission had gone bad, that you were missing, presumed dead. I've spent 3 years believing I failed you. Sarah set the photograph on her bedside table, her hands shaking slightly. "This is a lot to process. Even if what you're saying is true, I'm not that person anymore. I don't remember being a soldier, giving orders, or knowing you. I'm a trauma therapist who lives quietly in Phoenix." Arthur nodded, understanding the magnitude of what he was asking her to accept. "I know. And I'm not asking you to be someone you don't remember being. But I think there's a reason you ended up in that desert today. A reason I was the one who found you. Maybe your subconscious was trying to find answers. Or maybe it's just a coincidence," Sarah said, but her voice held doubt. "People can look similar. Military necklaces aren't unique." Arthur stood up, recognizing that he'd given her enough to think about for one day. "Maybe you're right, but would you be willing to meet my son? He's 8 years old, and he's fascinated by military history. If seeing him or hearing about my life triggers any memories, we'll know this is more than coincidence." Sarah considered the request. As a therapist, she understood that memory recovery couldn't be forced, but she also knew that familiar contexts sometimes helped unlock buried experiences. And despite her professional skepticism, she couldn't deny the strange sense of familiarity she felt with this man. "Okay," she said finally. "Once I'm released from the hospital. But I want to be clear, even if you're right about who I used to be, I need to understand what that means for who I am now." Arthur nodded, relief flooding through him. "That's fair. I'll give you my number, and you can call when you're ready." "But Sarah," he paused at the door, "if you are Captain Finch, then you should know that your unit never stopped looking for answers about what happened to you. You were a good officer and a better person. That doesn't change, memory or no memory." As Arthur left the hospital for the second time that day, Sarah stared at the photograph he'd left behind. The woman in military fatigues looked confident, capable, surrounded by soldiers who clearly respected her. It was so different from the life Sarah remembered building in Phoenix, yet something about the image felt right in a way she couldn't explain. For the first time in 3 years, Sarah Chun wondered if the life she'd constructed was built on an incomplete foundation, and whether the answers she'd stopped looking for might be standing on the other side of a door she wasn't sure she was ready to open. 2 days later, Sarah was released from the hospital with strict instructions to avoid strenuous activity and stay hydrated. Arthur had offered to drive her back to Phoenix, but she'd insisted on taking a taxi, needing time to process their conversation and the photograph that now sat on her kitchen table like an unexploded bomb. Sarah's apartment in Phoenix felt different when she returned. The military history books on her shelves, the precise organization of her belongings, even her morning routine of exercise, everything took on new significance in light of Arthur's claims. She found herself studying her reflection in the bathroom mirror, trying to see Captain Alara Finch in Dr. Sarah Chun's face. The dreams came that first night with unprecedented clarity. Sarah found herself in a forward operating base, the sounds of helicopters and distant gunfire mixing with voices shouting coordinates. She was giving orders, making life and death decisions with confidence that felt both foreign and natural. Most vividly, she dreamed of a tall soldier with kind eyes who always said, "Yes, mum," with a slight smile that suggested deep respect and something more personal. Sarah woke with the taste of desert, sand in her mouth, and Arthur Campbell's name on her lips. Dr. Michael Torres noticed the change immediately when Sarah returned to work. "You seem different," he observed during their weekly supervision meeting. "More focused but also more restless. How are you processing the trauma from your desert experience?" Sarah had debated whether to tell Michael about Arthur's claims. As her mentor and friend, Michael deserved honesty, but the implications were so vast that Sarah wasn't sure where to begin. "Michael, what would you say if I told you that someone claims to know me from before my accident? Not just as an acquaintance, but as someone I worked closely with for months?" Michael set down his coffee, giving Sarah his full attention. "I'd say that's either a remarkable coincidence or a significant development in your recovery process. Tell me more." Sarah explained the rescue, Arthur's recognition of her necklace, and the photograph that showed someone who looked exactly like her in military uniform. Michael listened without interruption, his expression growing more serious as the story progressed. "Sarah, if this man is telling the truth, it could explain so much about your instinctive understanding of military culture and trauma responses. But you need to be careful. Memory recovery after traumatic brain injury can be unpredictable, and false memories can feel as real as authentic ones. I know the risks," Sarah said. "But Michael, what if he's right? What if I've been living as someone I'm not for 3 years? Then you'll need to decide who you want to be going forward," Michael replied gently. "Memory or no memory, you're still the person who's helped dozens of patients heal from their own traumas. That doesn't change." That evening, Sarah called. "Arthur." He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting by the phone. "Sarah, how are you feeling?" "Confused," she admitted. "But I've been thinking about your offer to meet your son. I'd like to take you up on that, if it's still open." "Of course. Tommy's been asking about you since I told him about the rescue. He wants to know if you're okay." They arranged to meet at Red Rock Park on Saturday afternoon, a neutral location where they could talk while Tommy played. Sarah spent the intervening days researching everything she could find about Forward Operating Base Phoenix and military operations in Afghanistan during the time frame Arthur had mentioned. The information felt familiar in a way that went beyond academic interest. Saturday arrived with the kind of perfect Arizona weather that made the desert feel magical rather than hostile. Sarah arrived at the park early, watching from her car as Arthur and his son approached the playground. Arthur looked different in civilian clothes, more relaxed but somehow smaller, as if the responsibility of single parenthood had worn down some of the military bearing she'd glimpsed in the hospital. Tommy was a revelation. 8 years old, with Arthur's dark hair and serious eyes. He carried himself with a precision that reminded Sarah of junior officers she couldn't remember knowing. When Arthur pointed toward her car, Tommy straightened his shoulders and walked over with purpose. "Are you the lady my dad saved in the desert?" Tommy asked through her car window, his directness catching Sarah off guard. "I am," Sarah replied, getting out of the car. "You must be Tommy. Your father told me you're interested in military history." Tommy's face lit up. "I know about every major battle in Afghanistan. Dad was there, but he doesn't like to talk about it much. He says some stories are too sad to share." Arthur approached, looking slightly embarrassed. "Tommy, remember what we discussed about personal questions?" "It's okay," Sarah said, kneeling to Tommy's eye level. "What would you like to know about? Military history?" For the next hour, Sarah found herself engaged in the most natural conversation she'd had in years. Tommy's questions about military tactics, rank structures, and historical battles were sophisticated beyond his age, and Sarah discovered she could answer them with detail that surprised even her. More remarkably, she found herself automatically adjusting her explanations to Tommy's learning style, incorporating visual aids and hands-on demonstrations that seemed to come from experience rather than textbook knowledge. "You're really good with him," Arthur observed as Tommy ran ahead to explore a rock formation. "He's a special kid," Sarah replied. "You've done an amazing job raising him alone." Arthur was quiet for a moment. "It wasn't supposed to be alone. When I was deployed, I used to plan our future Tommy, me, maybe more kids someday. After my divorce and then losing you, I mean, losing Captain Finch, he corrected himself. I figured Tommy and I were better as a team of two. Sarah felt a pang of emotion she couldn't identify. Arthur, can I ask you something? In that photograph, the person you say is me, what was she like? As a person, not just as an officer. Arthur smiled, the first genuine smile Sarah had seen. From him, she was brilliant but never made others feel stupid. She could be tough when she needed to be, but she remembered everyone's birthday and kept photos of their families in her office. She taught herself basic Spanish because half our unit was Hispanic, and she wanted to communicate with them in their native language during downtime. The description resonated in a way that made Sarah's chest tight. She sounds like someone worth remembering. She was someone worth following anywhere, Arthur said quietly. And when she disappeared, it felt like losing the best part of myself. Tommy returned from his exploration with a smooth desert stone shaped roughly like an arrowhead. Look what I found. Dad, can Sarah come to dinner tonight? I want to show her my maps. Arthur looked at Sarah questioningly. You don't have to. I'd like that, Sarah interrupted, surprising herself. If it's not too much trouble. Arthur's small house reflected the same organizational principles Sarah had noticed in her own apartment, everything in its place, functional furniture, minimal decoration except for Tommy's artwork and achievement certificates. But it felt warm in a way her Phoenix apartment never had. Lived in and loved. Tommy's room was a testament to his interests, maps covering every wall, books about military history organized by time period and conflict, and a desk where he'd been working on what appeared to be a detailed battle plan for Normandy. This is incredible work, Sarah said, studying Tommy's drawings. Your understanding of tactical positioning is very sophisticated. Dad taught me, Tommy said proudly. He says understanding history helps you make better decisions in the present. As Sarah examined Tommy's maps, something shifted in her perception. The tactical thinking, the strategic planning, the way Tommy had organized information, it all felt familiar, like looking at her own work from years ago. Without thinking, she picked up a pencil and made a small adjustment to Tommy's Normandy plan, adding a supply line that would have been crucial to the operation's success. How did you know to add that? Tommy asked, amazed. Sarah stared at the pencil in her hand, realizing she'd made the correction automatically. I am not sure. It just seemed obvious. Arthur was watching from the doorway, his expression unreadable. After Tommy went to bed, they sat on Arthur's small patio, the desert night sky brilliant with stars. It's you, Arthur said quietly. I know you don't remember, but watching you with Tommy tonight, seeing you correct his battle plan without thinking, you're Captain Finch. The question is, what do we do about it? Sarah was quiet for a long time, wrestling with the implications. Arthur, even if you're right, I'm not the person I was 3 years ago. I don't have those memories, that training, that confidence. I'm a therapist who lives quietly and helps people heal from trauma. Maybe that's exactly who Captain Finch was meant to become, Arthur replied. Maybe losing your memory wasn't just a tragedy, maybe it was a chance to become someone even better. As Sarah drove back to Phoenix that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that her carefully constructed life was about to change in ways she couldn't control or predict. For 3 years, she'd built an identity around helping others recover from loss. Now she faced the possibility that her own greatest loss might actually be a chance for her most important recovery yet. The memories began returning in fragments over the following weeks, triggered by the most unexpected moments. Sarah would be conducting a therapy session with a veteran and suddenly find herself correcting his description of military protocol with information she shouldn't have known. During a team meeting, she automatically arranged chairs in a formation that optimized sight lines and escape routes, then couldn't explain why she'd done it. Most disturbing were the moments when her professional persona would slip entirely. While reviewing a case file about a soldier who'd lost his unit in an IED attack, Sarah found herself speaking with an authority that startled her colleagues. "This soldier isn't experiencing standard survivor's guilt," she'd told Dr. Torres with unwavering confidence. "His symptoms indicate command responsibility trauma. He was the ranking officer when the attack occurred, and he's carrying the weight of decisions made under impossible circumstances. Traditional PTSD protocols won't work here. He needs leadership-specific intervention." Michael had stared at her. "Sarah, that's incredibly insightful, but leadership trauma protocols aren't something you've studied. How do you know about command-specific therapeutic approaches?" Sarah had no answer. The knowledge had simply been there, as natural as breathing. Arthur began visiting Phoenix regularly, ostensibly to check on Sarah's recovery, but really because both of them were drawn to continue their conversations. He would bring Tommy, and the three of them would explore the desert around Phoenix, with Sarah displaying an uncanny ability to navigate terrain and identify potential hazards that impressed even Arthur's professional guide instincts. "You move like someone who's done this before," Arthur observed one afternoon as they hiked Camelback Mountain. "Military training doesn't just disappear, even with memory loss." Sarah had been walking point, automatically choosing the safest paths and frequently checking behind them to ensure Tommy was managing the trail safely. "I don't feel like I'm remembering," she said. "It's more like my body knows things my mind doesn't understand." Tommy, who had become fascinated with Sarah's presence in their lives, began asking increasingly specific questions about her work with veterans. His 8-year-old mind made connections that adults might have missed. "Sarah, do you ever dream about the soldiers you help?" Tommy asked one evening as they shared dinner at Arthur's house. "Sometimes," Sarah admitted. "Why do you ask?" "Because you talk about them like you were there with them. Not like a doctor talking about patients, but like a soldier talking about other soldiers." The observation was so astute that both adults fell silent. Tommy continued eating his sandwich, unaware that he'd identified something that had been troubling Sarah for weeks. Sarah's apartment became a shrine to questions she couldn't answer. She'd moved the military books to her coffee table, surrounded by notebooks where she recorded fragments of returning memories. She'd started keeping a detailed journal of her dreams, trying to identify patterns and connections that might unlock larger blocks of her past. The dreams were becoming more specific and more frequent. Sarah would find herself back at Forward Operating Base Phoenix, walking through corridors that felt as familiar as her own apartment hallway. She dreamed of mission briefings, tactical discussions, and moments of quiet camaraderie with soldiers, whose faces were becoming clearer each night. In one particularly vivid dream, she was sitting across from Arthur in what appeared to be her military office, discussing his upcoming leave to spend time with Tommy. Dream Sarah was reviewing Arthur's personnel file, making notes about his exemplary service record and his request for family support resources. "Campbell, I want you to know that your dedication to your son reflects the same leadership qualities that make you invaluable to this unit," Dream Sarah was saying. "When we get back stateside, I'm recommending you for promotion and ensuring you get assigned somewhere that prioritizes family stability." Sarah woke from that dream with tears on her face and Arthur's full military service record somehow clear in her mind, including details about his divorce, his ex-wife's struggles with military life, and his fears about being an adequate father. While serving overseas. The next day, she called Arthur with a question that surprised them both. "Arthur, when you were deployed, did you ever talk to your commanding officer about Tommy's autism diagnosis? About your concerns that your ex-wife wasn't getting him proper educational support?" Arthur nearly dropped his phone. "How could you possibly know about that?" "I never told anyone about those conversations, except," he stopped, the implication hitting him like physical force. "Except Captain Finch," Sarah finished quietly. "Arthur, I think I'm starting to remember." Their relationship began shifting as fragments of the past merged with present reality. Sarah found herself slipping into patterns of concern and care for Arthur that went beyond friendship, but felt entirely natural. She began calling him by his first name in a way that carried undertones of familiarity and authority that made him instinctively straighten his posture. More significantly, Sarah began demonstrating knowledge about Tommy that she couldn't have learned through their recent interactions. She knew that he preferred his sandwiches cut diagonally, that he needed exactly 15 minutes of quiet time after school, beginning homework, and that he had nightmares about his father being in danger. "How do you know about Tommy's nightmares?" Arthur asked one evening after Sarah had instinctively known to check on the boy when he stirred restlessly during a nap. "I remember writing letters," Sarah said slowly, her hand moving to her eagle pendant. "Not recent letters, but from before. Letters to your ex-wife, explaining Tommy's needs and asking her to get him proper evaluation and support. I remember being frustrated that she wasn't taking his autism seriously." Arthur sat down heavily. "Captain Finch did write to Rebecca, multiple letters actually. They were part of what convinced Rebecca to finally get Tommy properly diagnosed and into early intervention programs. How do you remember that?" "I don't remember it like a normal memory," Sarah explained. "It's more like information that's always been there, but I'm just now able to access it. Like finding files in a locked drawer that someone just gave me the key to." Sarah's work at the rehabilitation center began reflecting her emerging memories in ways that impressed and puzzled her colleagues. Her treatment plans for veteran patients became remarkably sophisticated, incorporating strategies that seemed to come from deep personal understanding rather than textbook knowledge. Dr. Torres called her into his office after reviewing her recent case notes. "Sarah, your work has always been excellent, but lately it's been extraordinary. Your insights into military trauma are at the level of someone with decades of field experience. I'm wondering if your own recent trauma has somehow enhanced your empathetic capabilities." Sarah considered telling Michael the truth about her recovering memories, but something held her back. The implications were so vast, her entire identity, her career, her future, that she wasn't ready to open that conversation until she better understood what she was dealing with herself. Instead, she deflected. "I've been doing a lot of additional research lately. Personal experience with memory trauma has given me new perspective on my patients' experiences." But privately, Sarah was becoming increasingly certain that her therapeutic intuitions weren't coming from research or empathy. They were coming from lived experience as a military officer who had been responsible for the psychological well-being of soldiers under her command. The most emotionally complex development was Sarah's growing attachment to Tommy. The boy had begun calling her spontaneously, asking for help with homework or simply wanting to share discoveries about military history. Sarah found herself responding with a maternal protectiveness that felt both foreign and entirely natural. When Tommy called one evening, upset because other children at school had been teasing him about his father's military service, Sarah's response was immediate and decisive. "Tommy, listen to me carefully," she said, her voice carrying unmistakable authority. "Your father is a hero who served his country with honor and courage. Anyone who suggests otherwise doesn't understand what real bravery looks like. You tell those children that your dad saved lives and protected freedom, and that makes you part of a military family with a proud tradition of service." After the call, Sarah realized she'd spoken to Tommy with the same tone she'd probably used to address young soldiers under her command. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. Arthur noticed the change too. "You're remembering more than you're telling me, aren't you?" he asked after witnessing Sarah's confident handling of Tommy's crisis. "Yes," Sarah admitted. "But, Arthur, the more I remember, the more complicated everything becomes. If I really am Captain Finch, then I have responsibilities and relationships I don't fully understand yet. And I have a life as Dr. Sarah Chun that I can't just abandon. What if you don't have to choose? Arthur suggested. What if Captain Finch and Dr. Sarah Chun can coexist? What if the person you've become is exactly who you were meant to be? Sarah wanted to believe him, but she could feel larger forces at work. Her memories weren't just returning randomly, they were building towards something significant, some crucial event or realization that would force her to confront the full truth about her past and make decisions about her future. The breaking point came when Sarah woke one morning with complete recall of the mission that had changed everything. She remembered the classified operation, the intelligence that had gone wrong, and most importantly, she remembered why she had been in the Arizona desert 3 years ago. When the accident occurred, she hadn't been a random tourist who'd gotten lost. She had been on a specific mission, carrying information that could have saved lives or destroyed careers, depending on how it was used. And someone had tried to stop her from completing that mission, for the first time since the rescue. Sarah Chun understood that her amnesia might not have been an unfortunate accident. It might have been the result of something much more dangerous. And if her memories were returning, the people responsible for her disappearance might realize she was becoming a threat once again. As Sarah stared at herself in the bathroom mirror. That morning, she saw Captain Alara Finch looking back at her for the first time in 3 years. And Captain Finch knew that the quiet life of Dr. Sarah Chun was about to become very complicated indeed. The first sign of external pressure came through an unexpected source. Sarah arrived at the Sunrise Rehabilitation Center on Monday morning to find a man in an expensive suit waiting in the reception area, studying the employee directory with professional interest. Dr. Chun? He approached with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. Agent Marcus Daniels, Department of Defense Security. I was hoping we could have a brief conversation about your recent medical emergency. Sarah's newly awakened military instincts immediately went on high alert. I'm sorry, Agent Daniels, but I fail to see how my personal medical situation would be of interest to the Department of Defense. Perhaps we could speak privately? Daniels suggested, his tone polite but carrying an undertone that made it clear this wasn't really a request. In her office, Daniels closed the door and produced a tablet displaying what appeared to be official government documentation. Dr. Chun, our records show that you were treated for heat exhaustion at Desert Valley Medical Center last week. During that treatment, you came into contact with Arthur Campbell, a former Army sergeant. We're conducting a routine security review and need to understand the nature of your interaction. Sarah's mind raced. The official story was that she was Dr. Sarah Chun, a civilian therapist with no military connections. But Agent Daniels' presence suggested that someone in the government was tracking Arthur's activities, possibly his interactions with people who might have connections to his military service. Mr. Campbell rescued me from the desert, Sarah said. Carefully, I thanked him for saving my life. I'm not sure what security implications that might have. Daniels consulted his tablet. Our concern is that Mr. Campbell has been asking questions about a classified operation from his deployment in Afghanistan. Questions about missing personnel and mission details that remain sealed. We want to ensure that his contact with you hasn't involved sharing sensitive information. Agent Daniels, I work with veterans regularly. I'm well aware of the confidentiality requirements surrounding classified military information. Mr. Campbell has never discussed anything related to his military service beyond general observations about veteran healthcare needs. It was technically true, though Sarah was beginning to understand that her recovering memories contained classified information that could be extremely valuable or extremely dangerous. After Daniels left, Sarah immediately called Arthur. We need to talk, and not over the phone. Can you come to Phoenix tonight? That evening, in Sarah's apartment, She shared the details of the government agent's visit, while Arthur's expression grew increasingly grim. "They're monitoring me," Arthur sighed. "Sarah, there are aspects of Captain Finch's disappearance that were never properly investigated. Questions about whether the mission failure was due to bad intelligence or something more deliberate." "What kind of questions?" Sarah asked, though part of her was beginning to remember. Arthur chose his words carefully. There were suspicions that someone with high-level security clearance was selling information to insurgent groups. Captain Finch was investigating those suspicions when she disappeared. If you're really her, and if your memories are returning, then you might know. Things that certain people would prefer remained forgotten. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Arthur, I need to tell you something. My memories aren't just returning randomly. I'm starting to remember specific details about that last mission, including why I was in the Arizona desert when the accident happened." She explained what she'd begun to recall: the classified documents she'd been carrying, the planned meeting with a Department of Defense investigator, and the growing certainty that her car accident hadn't been accidental. "If someone tried to kill you 3 years ago to prevent you from exposing military corruption, and now they know you're alive and your memories are returning ... Arthur didn't finish the thought. "Then Tommy and I could be in danger too," Sarah completed. "Anyone connected to Captain Finch becomes a potential threat to be managed." Their conversation was interrupted by Sarah's phone ringing. Dr. Torres was calling, his voice tight with concern. "Sarah, I just received a very troubling call from the hospital administration. Apparently, there are questions about your credentials and background that require immediate review. They're suggesting you take a leave of absence pending investigation." After the call ended, Sarah and Arthur looked at each other with growing understanding. The pressure wasn't random, it was coordinated, designed to isolate Sarah from her support systems and professional identity. "They're dismantling Dr. Sarah Chin's life," Arthur said, "forcing you to become Captain Finch again, whether you're ready or not." The personal obstacles were just as challenging as the external ones. Sarah's relationship with Arthur was becoming increasingly complex as her memories returned. She was beginning to remember not just their professional military relationship, but the deeper personal connection that had developed during their deployment. "Arthur, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest," Sarah said. "Was there something between us in Afghanistan beyond the command relationship?" Arthur was quiet for a long time. "What do you remember?" "I remember caring about you in a way that went beyond professional responsibility. I remember being concerned about your marriage, your relationship with Tommy, your future after military service. And I remember feeling like those concerns were more personal than they should have been for a commanding officer." Arthur nodded. Slowly, there were feelings on both sides. Nothing inappropriate happened while we were deployed, but yes, there was something there. Something that might have developed if circumstances had been different. And when I disappeared, it destroyed me, Arthur admitted. Not just because I lost a respected commanding officer, but because I lost someone I was beginning to love. Someone I thought I might have a future with once we were both back stateside. The revelation added another layer of complexity to Sarah's situation. As Dr. Sarah Chun, she'd been developing feelings for Arthur as they spent time together. Now, she understood that those feelings might be rooted in a deeper connection that predated her amnesia. But the most immediate obstacle was Tommy. The boy had become deeply attached to Sarah, and she to him. Tommy had begun talking about Sarah as if she were a permanent part of their family, making plans that included her presence and asking when she would move to Copper Springs to be closer to them. Arthur had tried to prepare Tommy for the possibility that Sarah's life in Phoenix might make regular visits difficult. But the boy's response had been surprisingly mature and heartbreakingly direct. "Dad, if Sarah is who you think she is, then she's been missing from our family for 3 years. Doesn't that mean we should try extra hard to make sure she doesn't disappear again? The comment had struck both adults silent, but it also highlighted the central dilemma Sarah faced. Tommy needed stability and consistency, not another adult figure who might vanish from his life. But Sarah's emerging memories and the external pressures she was facing meant that stability might be impossible to provide. The crisis came to a head when Sarah received a formal notification that her security clearance, one she didn't remember, was being reviewed, and that she was required to report for questioning at a federal facility in Phoenix within 48 hours. "They're forcing the issue," Arthur said after Sarah shared the notification. "If you go to that questioning, they'll either try to suppress your memories permanently, or they'll use what you remember against people who might be innocent. And if I don't go, then Dr. Sarah Chun becomes a fugitive, and Captain Finch becomes a national security threat." That night, as Sarah struggled with impossible choices, she received a phone call that changed everything. Tommy's voice was scared and small over the connection. "Sarah, Dad's not here, and there are men outside our house watching us. I'm scared. Can you come get me?" Sarah's training kicked in immediately. "Tommy, listen to me very carefully. Go to your dad's bedroom and lock the door. Then call 911 and tell them you need police protection. Don't open the door for anyone except uniformed police officers with badges, understand?" "What about Dad? Where is he?" Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized Arthur's absence wasn't coincidental. "Tommy, I'm coming to get you right now. Stay on the phone with me until the police arrive." As Sarah grabbed her keys and headed for her car, she understood that the time for careful decisions and gradual revelation had ended. Someone had escalated the situation by threatening an innocent boy, and that meant Captain Alara Finch needed to return fully, not to hide in the shadows of Dr. Sarah Chun's quiet life, but to protect the people she cared about most. The drive to Copper Springs felt like the longest 2 hours of Sarah's life, but it also felt like the most important mission she'd ever undertaken. By the time she reached Tommy, she would need to decide once and for all whether she was Dr. Sarah Chun trying to help a friend's son, or Captain Ilara Finch preparing to defend her family against enemies who had already proven they would stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried. Sarah arrived in Copper Springs to find 2 police cars parked outside Arthur's house, and Tommy sitting on the front steps with a female officer, clutching his backpack like a lifeline. The boy's face broke into relief when he saw her approaching. "Sarah, the policeman said Dad had an accident, but I think the bad men took him," Tommy said, running into her arms with the straightforward trust that only children possess. "Officer." Janet Riley introduced herself and filled Sarah in on the situation. Mr. Campbell's truck was found at the bottom of Canyon Creek Ravine, about 6 miles outside town. No body recovered yet, but there are signs that someone may have forced the vehicle off the road. "We're treating this as a potential kidnapping. Or worse." Sarah's military training processed the information quickly. The timing wasn't coincidental. Arthur had been taken the same day she'd received the federal questioning notice. Someone was eliminating variables, and Tommy was likely next on their list. "Officer Riley, I'm Dr. Sarah Chun. I work with veteran trauma patients, and I've been helping Arthur with some personal matters. Tommy called me because he was frightened. Is there somewhere safe we can take him while you continue the investigation? His grandmother is driving down from Flagstaff, should be here by morning. Until then, we can arrange protective custody, or if you're willing to take responsibility for him overnight, that might be less traumatic." Sarah didn't hesitate. "I'll take him." As they drove back toward Phoenix with Tommy secured in her back seat, Sarah's mind raced through the implications. Arthur's disappearance confirmed that the people behind her original accident were still active and still dangerous. They'd taken Arthur as leverage against her, betting that she cared enough about him and Tommy to surrender whatever information she'd recovered. They were right about her caring, But they'd miscalculated her response. Instead of making Sarah more compliant, threatening her family had awakened something that 3 years of amnesia hadn't completely suppressed. Captain Alara, Finch's tactical mind and protective instincts. Sarah? Tommy's voice was small from the back seat. Are you really a soldier like Dad said? Sarah adjusted her rearview mirror to meet Tommy's eyes. For the first time since her rescue in the desert, she answered with complete certainty. Yes. Tommy, I am. And I'm going to find your father and bring him home safely. Promise? I promise. But I need you to be very brave and help me, okay? This is going to be like the military missions you study in your books, except this one is real. And very important. Tommy straightened in his seat, his 8-year-old mind rising to meet the challenge. What do you need me to do? Sarah's plan was risky but necessary. Instead of taking Tommy to her Phoenix apartment where they could be easily located, she drove to a safe house she somehow knew about, another fragment of recovered memory that came with precise knowledge of location, access codes, and emergency protocols. The safe house was a nondescript ranch home in Scottsdale, maintained by military intelligence for situations exactly like this. Sarah's security clearance was apparently still active despite the investigation. Because her codes worked perfectly. Once inside, Sarah accessed secure communication equipment that felt as familiar as her own hands. Tommy watched in fascination as she transformed from the gentle therapist he knew into a focused military officer coordinating a rescue operation. This is Captain Finch, authentication code Delta 779er. Sarah spoke into the encrypted communication device. I need immediate contact with Colonel Harrison, Defense Intelligence Agency. The response came within minutes. Captain Finch? This is Colonel Harrison. We thought you were dead. Where the hell have you been for 3 years? Colonel, I need extraction support for a civilian who's been taken by hostile elements related to Operation Desert Phoenix. The civilian has an 8-year-old dependent who needs protection. Captain, you're supposed to be in federal custody for questioning. There's a warrant. Sir, with respect, the people who issued that warrant are likely the same ones who tried to kill me 3 years ago and who have now kidnapped Staff Sergeant Arthur Campbell. I'm requesting emergency authorization to complete the mission I was originally assigned to Desert Phoenix. There was a long pause. Captain, are you saying you remember what happened? I remember everything, sir, including the evidence I was carrying about military personnel selling intelligence to insurgent groups. Evidence that certain people would prefer remained buried with me. Another pause then. Stand by for secure data transmission. We're sending you current intelligence on possible locations where Campbell might be held. Captain Finch? Yes, sir. It's good to have you back. Over the next hour, Sarah accessed files and intelligence reports that painted a clear picture of the conspiracy she'd been investigating 3 years earlier. A network of military contractors and corrupt officials had been selling tactical information to insurgent groups, information that had led to the deaths of American soldiers. Sarah had been close to exposing the entire operation when she'd been targeted for elimination. Her car accident in the Arizona desert had been a carefully planned assassination attempt that had failed only because she'd survived with amnesia instead of dying as intended. Now, Arthur had been taken because his questions about Sarah's disappearance and the failed mission had drawn attention. The same people who'd tried to kill her were cleaning up loose ends, and Arthur represented unfinished business. Tommy proved to be an unexpected asset. His encyclopedic knowledge of military tactics and his ability to process complex information quickly made him an ideal intelligence analyst, despite his age. Sarah, look at this pattern, Tommy said, studying the satellite imagery that showed possible holding locations. If the bad guys took Dad to question him, they'd want somewhere isolated, but with good escape routes. These 3 locations all have helicopter landing capabilities and multiple road access points. Sarah studied Tommy's analysis with growing admiration. "You're absolutely right. And this one," she pointed to a compound northeast of Phoenix, "matches the geographic profile of facilities used by the contracting company that was part of the original conspiracy." "So that's where Dad is?" "Probably. But Tommy, I need you to understand something. The people holding your father are very dangerous. They've already tried to kill me once, and they won't hesitate to hurt anyone who gets in their way." Tommy's response surprised her with its maturity. "Dad always says that sometimes you have to fight to protect the people you love." "Is that what you're going to do?" "Yes, but I need you to stay here where you're safe while I go get him." Tommy shook his head firmly. "No, Dad taught me that soldiers never leave their unit behind. We're a unit now, aren't we? You, me, and Dad?" Sarah looked at the 8-year-old boy who was displaying courage that would have impressed seasoned soldiers. Tommy was right. They were a unit, a family forged by crisis and bonded by love. But taking him into danger was unthinkable. "Tommy, your father would never forgive me if I put you at risk. And I'll never forgive myself if we don't save him," Tommy replied with quiet determination. As Sarah weighed impossible choices, her secure communication device chimed with an incoming priority message. The text was brief but chilling. "Dr. Chun, we have Staff Sergeant Campbell. You have 12 hours to surrender yourself and any recovered materials to the coordinates attached to this message. Come alone, or the sergeant will not survive his interrogation. This is your only warning." The message was followed by a photograph that made Sarah's blood boil. Arthur, bound and clearly injured in what appeared to be a concrete holding cell. "Tommy." Read the message over her shoulder. "They hurt him." "Yes, they did. And now I have to decide whether to trade myself for his life or find another way to get him back." "What would Captain Finch do?" Tommy asked. Sarah smiled grimly, feeling the last vestiges of Dr. Sarah Chun's cautious civilian mindset fade away. Captain Finch would never negotiate with terrorists. She'd plan a rescue mission and complete the objective. Then that's what we do. As Sarah began planning the most important mission of her military career, she realized that the scared therapist who'd been rescued from the desert a month ago was gone. In her place stood Captain Elara Finch, and she was going to war to save her family. The tactical briefing took place in the secure safe house at 0400 hours. With Sarah's military precision now fully operational and Tommy serving as an unexpectedly capable intelligence analyst. The satellite imagery spread across the dining table showed the Blackstone Security Compound, a private military contractor facility disguised as a corporate retreat center 30 miles northeast of Phoenix. "Target location confirmed," Sarah said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of Captain Finch for the first time in 3 years. Blackstone Security is the same company that was funneling intelligence to insurgent groups in Afghanistan. Their CEO, Marcus Vance, was the primary target of my original investigation. Tommy studied the compound layout with the focused intensity he usually reserved for historical battle maps. "Sarah, look at the guard rotation pattern. They change shifts every 4 hours, but there's a 7-minute gap at 06:00 when the night security reports to the command center before the day shift takes position." Sarah smiled despite the gravity of their situation. "Outstanding tactical analysis, soldier. That 7-minute window is our insertion opportunity." The plan was necessarily complex because Sarah refused to put Tommy in direct danger while still needing his unique capabilities. Tommy would remain in the vehicle at a safe distance, monitoring communications and coordinating with Colonel Harrison's backup team, while Sarah infiltrated the compound alone. "But I want to help more," Tommy protested. "Dad always says the best teams use everyone's strengths. Your strength is intelligence analysis and communication coordination," Sarah explained. "Those are crucial mission components. Without you managing our communications and providing real-time tactical updates, This rescue fails. Tommy straightened with pride at being given such important responsibilities, unaware that Sarah had deliberately structured his role to keep him as far from physical danger as possible, while still making him feel like a vital team member. At 530 hours, they departed the safe house in a vehicle Sarah had requisitioned through military channels, a modified SUV with enhanced communication equipment and tactical supplies. As they drove through the pre-dawn darkness toward the Blackstone compound, Sarah felt the familiar calm that preceded combat operations. "Tommy, I need you to understand something," Sarah said as they approached their staging area. "If something goes wrong during this mission, if I don't come back with your father, I need you to contact Colonel Harrison immediately. His direct number is programmed into the communication device. Can you promise me you'll follow that protocol?" "I promise," Tommy said solemnly. "But Sarah, you're going to come back with Dad. I know because you're the best soldier Dad ever served with, and he told me that Captain Finch never failed a mission." The faith in Tommy's voice was both heartening and terrifying. Sarah prayed that Arthur's confidence in her abilities was justified, because she was about to test skills she'd only recently remembered possessing. They established their forward observation post on a ridge overlooking the Blackstone compound at exactly 0545 hours. Through tactical binoculars, Sarah could see the facility's layout matched their intelligence perfectly. The main building housed administrative offices and a communications center, while a separate concrete structure behind it appeared to be the detention facility where Arthur was likely being held. "Tommy, communications check," Sarah said, adjusting her tactical radio. "Communications clear, Captain." Tommy responded with military precision that would have made any drill sergeant proud. "Backup units are standing by at Checkpoint Alpha and Bravo." At 0559 hours, Sarah began her approach to the compound perimeter. Her muscle memory guided her through movements she'd performed countless times in Afghanistan, staying low, using available cover, timing her advancement to avoid patrol routes Tommy was tracking through surveillance feeds. The 7-minute window opened exactly as predicted. Sarah crossed the perimeter fence and reached the detention building without encountering resistance. Her lock-picking skills, apparently retained despite her amnesia, made quick work of the facility's security measures. Inside the concrete structure, Sarah found Arthur in the third cell down a narrow corridor. He was conscious but clearly injured, with visible bruises and cuts indicating he'd been interrogated aggressively. "Arthur," Sarah whispered as she opened his cell door, "we're getting you out of here." Arthur's eyes widened with relief and amazement. "Sarah? How did you?" He stopped, studying her tactical gear and the confident way she moved. "You remember everything, don't you? You're really her. You're Captain Finch." "I remember enough," Sarah replied, helping Arthur to his feet and assessing his injuries. "Can you move? We have a narrow extraction window." "I can move." "Sarah, they made me tell them about your memory recovery. They know you're coming." Sarah's tactical instincts immediately went on high alert. How many operators? What's their response capability? At least 8 armed contractors, plus Marcus Vance himself. Their planning to Arthur's warning was cut short by the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside. Sarah positioned herself between Arthur and the cell door, her sidearm drawn. "And ready." "Captain Alara Finch," a voice called from the corridor. "I'm Marcus Vance, CEO of Blackstone Security. I believe we have some unfinished business to discuss." Vance appeared in the corridor, accompanied by 4 armed men, his expensive suit and corporate demeanor at odds with the military-grade weapons his team carried. "Mr. Vance," Sarah replied, her weapon trained on the center of his chest. "You're under arrest for treason, conspiracy, and the attempted murder of a federal officer." Vance smiled with the confidence of someone holding superior cards. "Captain, you're hardly in a position to make arrests. My men have you outgunned and surrounded. More importantly, We know about the boy. Sarah's blood turned to ice. What boy? Tommy. Campbell, age 8, currently positioned in a vehicle approximately 800 meters northwest of this facility. Excellent communication discipline, by the way. We've been monitoring his radio transmissions for the past 20 minutes. Sarah's mind raced through tactical options while her heart screamed in terror. She'd led Tommy directly into danger despite all her precautions. Your move, Captain, Vance continued. Surrender yourself and the evidence you recovered, and the boy remains unharmed. Continue this rescue attempt, and we'll add another tragedy to the Campbell family history. Arthur struggled to stand straighter despite his injuries. Sarah, don't do it. Tommy's smart and brave. He'll find a way out. But Sarah was already lowering her weapon. The mission parameters had changed completely. Saving Arthur wasn't worth risking Tommy's life, and Vance knew that her protective instincts would override her tactical training. What do you want? Sarah asked. The complete files you recovered about Operation Desert Phoenix. All copies, all backups, all evidence of our business arrangements in Afghanistan. In exchange, both Mr. Campbell and his son leave here unharmed. Sarah appeared to consider the offer while actually buying time for her backup plan. Tommy wasn't just monitoring communications, he was also in direct contact with Colonel Harrison's tactical team. If Sarah could keep Vance talking long enough, military support would arrive. Before I agree to anything, Sarah said, I want the complete truth about what happened 3 years ago. You owe me that much. Vance checked his watch, apparently confident enough in his position to indulge her request. Fair enough. Operation Desert Phoenix was a profitable arrangement that kept American contractors alive and well-funded, while providing valuable tactical information to local groups who could use it effectively. Unfortunately, idealistic officers like yourself couldn't appreciate the complex realities of modern warfare. You got American soldiers killed for money, Arthur said through gritted teeth. I kept Blackstone Security profitable and ensured our continued contracts with the Defense Department, Vance corrected. Captain Finch's investigation threatened to expose business relationships that were beneficial to all parties involved. Sarah felt rage building as the full scope of the betrayal became clear. How many soldiers died because of the intelligence you sold? That's irrelevant now. What matters is that you're going to provide us with all recovered evidence, and then you're going to disappear again. Permanently, this time. Sarah's communication device crackled quietly with Tommy's voice. Sarah, Colonel Harrison's team is in position. Blue team at the north entrance, red team moving to surround the detention building. I'm safe with the backup unit. Relief flooded through Sarah as she realized Tommy had successfully contacted their support team when Vance's men had approached his position. Her young analyst had performed exactly as any seasoned soldier would have under pressure. Mr. Vance, Sarah said, raising her weapon again, I have a counteroffer. You're going to surrender to federal authorities and provide complete testimony about your conspiracy. In exchange, you might live to see trial. Vance's confident expression faltered as tactical lights suddenly blazed through the windows of the detention facility, and amplified voices called for his surrender. This is Colonel Harrison, Defense Intelligence Agency. The facility is surrounded by federal agents. Release all hostages immediately and surrender. The firefight that followed was brief but intense. Vance's contractors were skilled, but outnumbered and outgunned by the federal tactical team. Sarah protected Arthur while guiding him toward the extraction route, her military training seamlessly integrating with the larger operation. When the dust settled 15 minutes later, Marcus Vance and 3 of his contractors were in federal custody. 1 contractor was dead, and the rest had surrendered. Arthur required medical attention, but would recover fully from his injuries. Outside the compound, Sarah found Tommy sitting in a federal tactical vehicle, wearing an oversized helmet and bulletproof vest, chattering excitedly with Colonel Harrison about communication protocols and tactical coordination. "Sarah!" Tommy launched himself from the vehicle into her arms. "Did you save Dad? Did we win?" "We won," Sarah confirmed, holding Tommy tightly while scanning the compound for Arthur. "And yes, your father is safe." Arthur emerged from the medical treatment area with his arm in a sling, but walking under his own power. When he saw Sarah and Tommy together, his expression showed relief, joy, and something deeper that had been building between them for weeks. "Captain Finch," Colonel Harrison approached with a formal bearing that carried undertones of deep respect. "Outstanding mission execution. Your tactical planning and resource utilization were textbook perfect. Thank you, sir." "But I had exceptional support," Sarah replied, placing her hand on Tommy's shoulder. Tommy Campbell provided intelligence analysis and communication coordination that were crucial to mission success. Tommy beamed with pride as Colonel Harrison shook his small hand with military formality. "Young man, if you ever decide to pursue a military career, you'll have my recommendation for officer candidate school." As the federal agents processed the scene and transported prisoners, Arthur, Sarah, and Tommy found themselves alone for the first time since the crisis had begun. The desert sunrise painted the landscape in brilliant oranges and reds, creating a backdrop that felt both peaceful and symbolic. "So," Arthur said, studying Sarah's face in the growing light, "Dr. Sarah Chun or Captain Alara Finch?" Sarah looked at Tommy, then at Arthur, then at the sunrise over the desert where her journey had begun. "I think I'm both," she said finally. "Captain Finch gave me the skills and strength to protect the people I love. Dr. Chun gave me the wisdom to know that family matters more than missions. I don't want to choose between them anymore." Tommy tugged on Sarah's tactical vest. "Does this mean you're staying? Does this mean we're a real family now?" Sarah knelt to Tommy's eye level, seeing in his hopeful expression the future she'd been afraid to dream about for 3 years. "Yes, Tommy, if your father will have me, I'm staying. We're going to be a real family." Arthur's answer came not in words, but in the way he gathered both Sarah and Tommy into his arms, holding them as if he never intended to let them go again. For the first time in 3 years, Captain Alara Finch was truly home, 6 months later. The morning sun streamed through the windows of their new home in Sedona, Arizona, a compromised location that offered Sarah access to veteran treatment facilities while providing Arthur opportunities to expand his wilderness guide business into the region's renowned Red Rock country. The house itself reflected their blended lives. Sarah's psychology texts shared shelf space with Arthur's outdoor survival manuals, while Tommy's military history collection had expanded to include an entire room that doubled as a family strategy. Sarah stood in the kitchen, preparing breakfast while listening to Arthur and Tommy discussing their weekend camping trip plans. The domestic scene would have seemed impossible during her years as Dr. Sarah Chun, when her Phoenix apartment had been a sterile sanctuary of controlled solitude. Now the comfortable chaos of family life felt as natural as breathing. "Mom, we practiced tactical navigation on our camping trip?" Tommy asked, the word "mom" still sending a warm flutter through Sarah's chest even after months of hearing it daily. "Of course, but remember that camping is also about enjoying nature, not just training exercises," Sarah replied, automatically adjusting her response to balance Tommy's military interests with childhood wonder. The integration of her maternal instincts with her tactical knowledge had become seamless, creating a parenting style that was both nurturing and preparation-focused. Arthur smiled as he watched their exchange. "Your mom's right, buddy. Though I have to admit, her tactical insights have improved our safety protocols considerably." The legal resolution of Sarah's dual identity had taken 3 months of complex negotiations between the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Department of Veterans Affairs, and various federal agencies. Colonel Harrison had personally overseen the process, ensuring that Captain Alara Finch's military record was properly restored while Dr. Sarah Chun's professional credentials remained intact. The result was unprecedented. Sarah now held both military rank and civilian medical licenses, allowing her to bridge two worlds in ways that benefited both. Her new practice, Desert Veterans Therapeutic Services, operated out of a facility near Flagstaff that served veteran populations across northern Arizona. Sarah's unique combination of personal military experience and professional psychology training had created treatment approaches that were gaining national attention. Her published research on memory integration therapy and identity reconstruction was being studied at military medical centers across the country. "The beautiful thing about your work now," Dr. Michael Torres had told her during a recent consultation call, "is that you're not just treating trauma, you're helping veterans integrate all aspects of their identity, military and civilian, into coherent, functional lives. You're living proof that people don't have to choose between who they were and who they've become." Sarah's patient load included not just traditional PTSD cases, but also veterans struggling with identity transitions, military families dealing with deployment stress, and civilians who'd experienced memory-related trauma. Her office walls display both her psychology degrees and her military commendations, sending a clear message that healing could come from understanding rather than forgetting the past. Tommy had adapted to their new life with the resilience that had always characterized him. His autism presented different challenges in a blended family environment, but Sarah's military precision in creating structured routines complemented Arthur's natural patience perfectly. Together, they developed systems that allowed Tommy to thrive academically while building social skills at his own pace. The boy's military history obsession had evolved into something more sophisticated under Sarah's guidance. She'd introduced him to current military families, allowing him to see modern military life rather than just historical battles. Tommy had become pen pals with several young soldiers, correspondence that helped him understand military service as a contemporary reality rather than just an academic subject. "Sarah, look what Corporal Martinez sent me," Tommy said, showing her a photograph of his pen pal's unit in South Korea. "He says they use some of the same tactical principles you taught me about terrain analysis." "That's right," Sarah confirmed, studying the photograph with professional interest. Military tactics evolve, but the fundamental principles of terrain assessment remain consistent across different conflicts and time periods. Arthur often marveled at watching Sarah interact with Tommy. Her ability to engage with his interests while gently expanding his worldview was remarkable. She'd helped Tommy understand that his fascination with military strategy could translate into civilian careers in logistics, emergency management, or international relations, giving him future options that built on his strengths rather than limiting them. The romantic relationship between Arthur and Sarah had developed slowly and carefully, built on a foundation of renewed trust and mutual respect. They'd both agreed that rushing into romance would complicate Tommy's adjustment to their blended family. Instead, they'd focused on rebuilding their partnership as co-parents and friends, allowing their deeper feelings to emerge naturally. Their first official date had been a family camping trip where Tommy served as their tactical advisor, planning routes and contingencies with the seriousness of a military strategist. Watching Sarah and Arthur work together to guide Tommy through a challenging hiking trail had been more romantic than any traditional dinner date could have been. "You know what I love most about us?" Arthur had told Sarah one evening as they sat on their patio watching Tommy practice knots he'd learned in a wilderness skills class. "We're not trying to recreate what we had in Afghanistan. We're building something entirely new that honors both our past and our present. Sarah's response had been to take his hand, feeling the calluses from years of manual labor that told the story of his journey from soldier to father to partner. "I think that's what healing really means, not forgetting who we were, but becoming who we're meant to be. The physical reminders of their shared military past had found new places in their civilian life. Sarah's eagle pendant necklace now hung in a shadow box alongside Arthur's service medals and Tommy's academic achievements, creating a family display that honored all their accomplishments. Her combat boots sat in the closet next to hiking boots and dress shoes, ready for whatever challenges their life might present. Professional colleagues often ask Sarah how she balanced her military identity with her therapeutic practice. Her standard response had become, "I don't balance them, I integrate them. Every experience I had as Captain Finch makes me a better therapist, and every patient I help as Dr. Chun makes me a better person." Tommy and Arthur taught me that identity isn't about choosing between different aspects of yourself. It's about allowing all those aspects to work together. The desert had become central to their family life in ways none of them had expected. Weekend camping trips were opportunities for Arthur to teach wilderness survival, while Sarah provided tactical training and Tommy contributed historical perspective. They developed a family tradition of sunrise hikes where they discuss goals and challenges while watching the desert landscape come alive with morning light. "The desert teaches patience," Sarah often told her patients. "It shows you that survival isn't about having all the resources you need, it's about using what you have effectively and helping others do the same." Tommy's social development had accelerated remarkably in their blended family environment. Having two parents who understood different aspects of his interests had given him confidence to engage with other children. He'd joined a junior wilderness club where his tactical knowledge and attention to detail made him a valuable team member rather than an outsider. "Mom, Dad, can we invite my friend Jake for our next camping trip?" Tommy asked one morning. "I want to show him the navigation techniques you taught me." Sarah and Arthur exchanged glances that communicated volumes about their pride in Tommy's growing social confidence. 6 months earlier, Tommy had rarely mentioned other children, preferring the safety of solitary activities. Now he was actively building friendships and wanting to share his family experiences with peers. The financial stability that came with Sarah's expanded practice had allowed Arthur to be more selective about his guide work, focusing on specialized military veteran wilderness programs rather than general tourism. Together, they developed therapeutic wilderness experiences that combined Arthur's outdoor expertise with Sarah's psychological training, creating unique treatment modalities that were being studied by other treatment centers. Their home had become a gathering place for other military families in the area. Monthly barbecues brought together veterans, active duty personnel, and their families for informal support networks that Sarah and Arthur facilitated naturally. Tommy had become the unofficial junior coordinator for these events, using his organizational skills to plan activities for military children of various ages. "What I appreciate most about your family," Colonel Harrison had told them during a recent visit, "is that you've created something that honors military service while building civilian success. You're showing other veterans that transition doesn't mean abandonment, it means evolution." Sarah's relationship with her Phoenix colleagues had evolved as well. Dr. Torres visited regularly, fascinated by her integrated treatment approaches, and often bringing referrals for veterans who needed specialized care. The professional respect she'd earned in both military and civilian contexts had opened doors for research collaborations and speaking opportunities. "You're changing how we think about trauma recovery," Dr. Torres had told her recently. "Instead of seeing military and civilian identities as conflicting, you're showing how they can enhance each other. That's revolutionary in our field." But perhaps the most significant change was in how Sarah viewed herself. For 3 years as Dr. Sarah Chun, she'd felt incomplete, as if crucial parts of her identity were missing. Now as both Captain Finch and Dr. Chun, she felt whole in a way she hadn't experienced since before her deployment to Afghanistan. Late at night, when Arthur and Tommy were asleep, Sarah would sometimes sit on their patio and look up at the desert stars. The same constellations that had guided her through missions in Afghanistan now watched over her family in Arizona. The continuity felt symbolic of her journey from soldier to therapist to mother, each role building on the previous while creating something entirely new. The challenges hadn't disappeared entirely. Sarah still experienced occasional nightmares about her years of amnesia, dreams where she lost her family again and couldn't find her way back to them. Tommy's autism required ongoing support and advocacy, particularly as he grew older and social. Situations became more complex. Arthur sometimes struggled with the transition from being a single father to sharing parental responsibilities, despite his obvious appreciation for Sarah's presence. But these challenges felt manageable within the context of their strong family unit. They'd learned to address problems as a team, using Sarah's analytical skills, Arthur's practical experience, and Tommy's unique perspective to find solutions that worked for all of them. The thing about families, Sarah often told her patients, is that they're not about having perfect people who never struggle. They're about having people who choose to struggle together and support each other through the difficult times. As their first year as a blended family approached, Sarah found herself looking forward to their future with anticipation rather than anxiety. Tommy was thriving academically and socially. Arthur's business was expanding into new areas that utilized his military experience productively. Sarah's professional reputation was opening doors for research and treatment, innovations that could help thousands of veterans. Most importantly, they'd created a family environment where everyone could be authentically themselves while growing into better versions of who they wanted to become. One evening, as they planned a camping trip to commemorate the anniversary of Sarah's desert rescue, Tommy made an observation that captured the essence of their journey. "You know what's interesting about our family story?" he said, studying a map of their planned route. "It started with someone getting lost in the desert, but it ended with everyone finding exactly where they belonged." Sarah and Arthur looked at each other across the map, recognizing the profound truth in their 8-year-old's words. Sometimes the greatest discoveries came not from seeking what you'd lost, but from embracing what you'd found in the process of searching. As the desert sun set behind the red rocks of Sedona, painting their living room in warm golden light, Sarah Campbell, both Captain Finch and Dr. Chun, soldier and therapist, individual and family member, knew that she was exactly where she belonged, with exactly the people who made her complete. The journey that had begun with a desperate rescue in the scorching desert had led to the most important mission of her life, building a family worthy of the sacrifices that had brought them together. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.